The moment the judge said final, my husband didn't look at me. He smiled. Not a big smile, not a cruel one, just a quiet, satisfied curve of the lips, like a man who believed he had won something permanent. He took the house, he took the savings, he took the business I helped build. And as he walked past me in that courtroom, suit perfectly pressed, shoulders relaxed, he leaned in just enough for me to hear him whisper, "You'll never recover from this." I didn't cry. I didn't speak. Because in that exact moment, I realized something he didn't. He had taken everything he could see, but he had no idea what he was really taking from me and what that would cost him. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This is my story of betrayal, and if you've ever trusted the wrong person, hit that subscribe button because you are not alone. Here is how it happened. I was reading comments on my YouTube videos the other day, and I realized I wasn't the only one who had lived this kind of quiet devastation. Strangers typing things like, "I lost everything overnight," and "the person I loved became someone I didn't recognize." That's when I knew I had to tell this story, from the beginning. Not the dramatic courtroom ending everyone imagines, but the subtle, almost invisible choices that led there. Because betrayal doesn't explode, it leaks. When I met him, I didn't fall in love fast. I fell in love carefully. He was calm where I was intense, logical where I was emotional, the kind of man who listened without interrupting and made you feel like your thoughts mattered. Or so I thought. He used to say, "We're a team," and I believed him, because teams don't keep score. We married quietly, no massive wedding, just promises, laughter, and the belief that respect would carry us through anything. The first red flag didn't feel red, it felt responsible. He suggested we simplify finances, one account, one plan, one vision. "Trust me," he said, "I'm better with numbers." And because love teaches us to lean instead of question, I did. The business came next. My idea, my late nights, my connections. He handled paperwork, I handled creation. He stood beside me in photos, always slightly behind, letting people assume I was the face. And that didn't bother him. What I didn't see was how carefully he watched. Every contract, every signature, every moment I was too tired to read the fine print. When people praised me, he smiled. When people paid us, he deposited the money. I thought that was partnership. I didn't know it was training. The shift didn't happen all at once. It started with phrases like, "That's not how it works legally. You wouldn't understand the tax side. Let me handle this, it's safer." Safer for who? By the time I noticed my name disappearing from documents, it felt too awkward to bring up. By the time I realized the house wasn't technically mine, I was already emotionally exhausted. And exhaustion makes you quiet. Then came the distance. He stopped asking my opinion, stopped waiting for my approval, stopped pretending decisions were mutual. When I confronted him, really confronted him, he looked genuinely surprised. "Why are you being so dramatic?" he asked. "Everything I'm doing is for us." That word, us, it became a weapon. The divorce conversation didn't start with shouting. It started with paperwork slid across a table. No warning, no counseling, no fight. Just facts. He had prepared for months, maybe years, every asset positioned, every risk minimized. I remember scanning the pages, my name appearing less and less until finally, almost nowhere. In court, he was calm, polite, convincing. I was emotional, unprepared, still processing the idea that the man beside me for years had quietly built an exit that left me empty-handed. The judge ruled based on what was documented, not what was felt. And legally, he was right. When it was over, he shook his lawyer's hand, didn't shake mine. That's when he whispered that sentence, the one he thought would haunt me forever. After the divorce, silence moved in faster than grief. No phone calls, no shared calendar reminders, no one asking if I'd eaten. Just an empty apartment I could barely afford, with boxes stacked like unfinished thoughts. The first night alone, I slept on the floor, not because I didn't have a bed, but because the bed felt like a lie. Every corner of it remembered a version of me that trusted too easily. I stared at the ceiling and replayed his whisper in the courtroom. "You'll never recover from this." It echoed not as cruelty, but as certainty. And certainty is harder to fight than anger. The next weeks were brutal in quiet ways. Friends didn't know what to say. Some chose sides without asking. Others vanished completely, like my pain was contagious. Bills arrived with my name on them. Assets didn't. I went from being the successful woman behind a growing business to someone calculating groceries down to the cent. And the worst part? He seemed untouched. Photos surfaced online, him at restaurants, smiling, traveling, living proof that the world had rewarded him for being strategic instead of honest. I wondered if I had been naive or just inconvenient. One afternoon, while sorting through old files, I found a notebook. My handwriting. Ideas, concepts, early drafts of the business scribbled before it even had a name. I remembered those nights, how I'd talked him through everything, believing love meant transparency. That notebook wasn't worth anything legally, but it reminded me of something vital. The business hadn't started with paperwork. It started with me. Still, that realization didn't pay rent, so I did what people do when pride has nowhere left to hide. I asked for help. Not money, just work. Old contacts, former collaborators, people who remembered my voice before it was filtered through his. Some didn't respond, some politely declined, but one message changed everything. It was short. "I always wondered why you disappeared." We met for coffee. No lawyers, no contracts, just two people talking like it was 5 years ago. He told me something I wasn't ready to hear. When my ex had taken over negotiations, people noticed the shift. The energy changed, the creativity dulled. Clients didn't leave because the product was bad. They left because the soul was gone. He leaned forward and said quietly, "We thought you chose to step back." That sentence hit harder than the divorce because it meant something worse than betrayal. It meant erasure. I walked home numb but not broken. For the first time since the courtroom, something cracked open. Not pain, but clarity. My ex hadn't just taken assets, he'd taken credit. And credit can be reclaimed. I started small. No announcements, no revenge fantasies, just rebuilding skills I had abandoned to keep the peace. I freelanced anonymously, consulted quietly, created without attaching my name. And something strange happened. People responded. Not to branding, not to reputation, but to quality. Late one night, while sending an invoice, I noticed something odd. The client had forwarded an email thread. My ex's company had pitched them weeks earlier. They declined. Not aggressively, just uninterested. The reason was lacks originality, feels recycled. I read that line 3 times. Then I laughed. Not loudly, not bitterly, just a soft, disbelieving laugh. He had taken everything visible, but he couldn't take instinct or intuition or the quiet courage built from years of being underestimated. What he took from me forced him to carry something heavy in return, a business without its origin. Still, I didn't reach out, didn't warn him, didn't celebrate, because this wasn't about winning. It was about watching the truth surface on its own. Months passed. My inbox filled slowly. My confidence returned unevenly, but genuinely. Then one morning, an unfamiliar name appeared in my messages. His lawyer. The subject line was polite. Too polite. Regarding intellectual property concerns. My hand shook, not with fear, but anticipation, because that email told me something important. He had noticed. He claimed I was infringing on shared concepts, that my work resembled joint marital assets. The irony was painful. The man who erased my name now was trying to claim my mind. I forwarded the email to a lawyer I could finally afford. She read it once and smiled. A real smile, the kind professionals don't fake. She said, "He's reaching." And then she said something else, something that made my chest tighten. "But if he's contacting you now, it means something is already going wrong." That night, I checked public records. His company had taken debt, big debt, the kind that assumes growth will fix everything. Growth that wasn't coming, because growth requires creativity, and creativity can't be stolen cleanly. I imagined him at his desk, frustrated, confused, still believing control was enough, still believing documents could replace vision, still believing I was the weak one. And for the first time since the divorce, I felt something close to calm. Not joy, not revenge, just inevitability. But the story didn't end with quiet rebuilding, because when people who rely on power start losing it, they don't reflect, they retaliate. And the next move he made wasn't legal, it was personal. The first personal move he made was subtle. Too subtle for anyone else to notice, but I noticed immediately. A former client messaged me late one evening, tone awkward, apologetic. "Hey, just wanted to ask, are you okay? I heard some things." I stared at the screen, already knowing the answer before I asked. "What things?" There was a pause, then typing bubbles, then silence. Finally, he said you were unstable after the divorce, that you were trying to recreate his work, that people should be careful. I set the phone down slowly. Not because it hurt, but because it confirmed something far more dangerous. He was scared. Powerful people don't whisper unless they're losing their voice. He wasn't trying to win clients anymore. He was trying to discredit me. And that meant one thing. I had become a problem. I didn't confront him, didn't defend myself publicly, didn't correct the narrative, because reacting would have given him what he wanted, proof that he could still move me. Instead, I did something far more unsettling. I kept working, quietly, relentlessly, better than before. The rumors spread anyway, that I was difficult, that I was emotional, that the divorce had affected my judgment. Old labels, dusty, familiar, lazy. And I recognized them for what they were, desperation dressed as concern. What he didn't expect was that people would come to me with the rumors instead of believing them. They asked questions. They noticed contradictions. They remembered how things had felt when I was involved and how empty they felt now. Truth doesn't need defending when comparison exists. Then came the call, a mutual acquaintance, someone neutral, someone cautious. "I didn't know whether to tell you this," she said, "but he's struggling." I stayed silent. She continued. Clients pushing back, deadlines missed, staff turnover. Apparently, he'd become difficult to work with, controlling, dismissive, quick to blame, the same traits I'd absorbed quietly for years. But without me there to soften the edges, they were sharp. I ended the call and sat in stillness. There was no triumph in it, just recognition. The version of him the world was now seeing was the version I had protected everyone from, including himself. That night he emailed me directly. No lawyers, no formality, just one line. "We need to talk." I didn't respond immediately. I reread it the next morning over coffee I paid for without checking my balance. That detail mattered. I replied simply, "About what?" His response came faster than mine had. "You know what." Control always reveals itself when it assumes access. We met in a public place. He looked older, not physically, energetically. His confidence felt rehearsed now, his charm slightly delayed. He talked first, about stress, about pressure, about how hard everything had been since the divorce. He never apologized, not once. Instead, he said something that clarified everything. "You walked away with nothing, and somehow you're still standing. That's not fair." There it was. Not regret, resentment. He accused me of undermining him, of confusing people, of capitalizing on shared history. I let him speak, because people reveal more when they think they're being heard. Finally, I asked one question. "If I'm so irrelevant, why are you here?" He froze, just for a second, but a second is enough. He leaned back inside. Then came the offer, a partnership. He framed it as reconciliation, as maturity, as closure. What it really was a leash. I didn't say no. I said I'd think about it, and that confused him more than rejection ever could, because he couldn't tell if I was afraid or strategic. What he didn't know was that I had already started documenting everything, every message, every rumor, every overreach. Not for revenge, for protection. Because when control slips, people escalate. 2 weeks later, the escalation came. A legal notice, cease and desist, claiming ownership over ideas that predated our marriage, ideas I could prove were mine. It was aggressive, sloppy, emotional, and that was his mistake. My lawyer's response was calm, measured, devastating. She attached timelines, original drafts, witness statements, and then, almost as an afterthought, she added one line: "Any further attempts to interfere with my client's professional relationships will be considered harassment." The reply took days. When it came, it wasn't from him. It was from his new lawyer. Shorter, colder, careful. Which meant someone had finally told him the truth. He was losing ground. The people who were used to winning don't stop fighting when they're wrong. They fight harder. And his next move wasn't in emails or contracts. It was something that reached much closer to home, something I never expected him to touch. He didn't come after my work next. He came after my reputation, not publicly, not loudly, but in the one place that still hurt, my family. It started with my sister calling me, her voice careful in that way people get when they've already formed an opinion but are pretending to ask questions. "He reached out," she said. He sounded worried about you. Worried. I closed my eyes. She continued, explaining how he framed it as concern, how he said the divorce had affected me more than I realized, how he wondered aloud if I was making healthy decisions. He never accused me directly. He implied. An implication is harder to defend against than lies. Within weeks, small shifts appeared. My mother asking if I was managing stress okay, a cousin casually mentioning that starting over at my age was risky, an uncle suggesting maybe I should slow down. None of them knew what he'd taken, only what he was telling them I'd lost. That was when it hit me. He didn't need to control me anymore. He just needed to control how others saw me. I confronted him, not in anger, in clarity. I sent a single message: please stop contacting my family. The reply came hours later. I was just checking in. People are worried. People. Always people. Never himself. I realized then something critical. He wasn't afraid of losing money. He was afraid of losing the story where he was reasonable, successful, the stable one, and I was the cautionary tale. But stories have a flaw. They fall apart when too many people hear the truth at once. I didn't go on a campaign. I didn't expose him. I simply stopped hiding. I attended events under my own name, spoke openly about my work, answered questions without bitterness. When asked about the divorce, I said one sentence only: I'm rebuilding, quietly, and I'm okay. That sentence did more damage than any accusation ever could, because people saw the contradiction. I didn't look unstable. I didn't sound broken. I wasn't asking for sympathy. I was functioning, and that confused them. The whispers changed tone, from concern to curiosity. Then concern shifted direction, toward him. One evening, I received an email from someone inside his company, anonymous, short. You should know he's blaming you for everything internally. I deleted it, not because it wasn't useful, but because I already knew. What surprised me was the next message, a second email, not anonymous, from a former employee. She apologized first, long, nervous paragraphs. Then she attached something, meeting notes, internal, dated months before the divorce, notes where he referred to me as a liability, as emotionally replaceable, as useful but temporary. I stared at the screen until the words blurred, not because they shocked me, but because they finally explained everything. The marriage hadn't ended because love failed. It ended because strategy succeeded. I thanked her, didn't ask for more, because what I had was already enough, not for court, for myself. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in years, not peacefully, decisively. A week later, he called, not emailed, called. I let it ring, then I answered. Silence on the line. Then his voice, tight, controlled. People are talking. I said nothing. You're not correcting them, he added. I almost smiled. He accused me of letting misunderstandings grow, of benefiting from ambiguity, of being unfair. And that's when I finally spoke. You taught me everything I know about silence, I said. I'm just using it better. He hung up. 2 days later, something unexpected happened. A journalist reached out. Business-related, neutral. She was writing about startups that collapsed after leadership changes. She asked if I'd be willing to speak off the record. I agreed. I told her nothing defamatory, nothing emotional, just facts, timelines, roles, shifts, and I never mentioned his name. She didn't need it. The article came out a month later. He wasn't mentioned directly, that everyone knew. And worse, the narrative wasn't scandal. It was incompetence. His call stopped. His email ceased. For a brief moment, I thought it was over, that he'd accepted the loss quietly. I was wrong, because when control fails and reputation cracks, some people don't retreat. They gamble. The final move he made wasn't subtle. It wasn't implied. It was bold enough to force a response and reckless enough to expose everything. It arrived in the mail, not digital, not legal, handwritten. 3 words on the envelope: "You owe me." I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Handwritten, familiar handwriting, careful strokes meant to feel intimate instead of threatening. He knew exactly what he was doing. I didn't open it right away. I made tea. I sat down. I let my hands stop shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of history pressing forward all at once. Then I unfolded the letter. It wasn't long. No accusations, no rage, just a narrative. His narrative. He wrote about sacrifice, about pressure, about how he had carried the marriage, how he had protected me from failure I never would have survived. And then came the core lie, the one everything else rested on. He claimed I had agreed to step back, agreed to let him lead, agreed to let my name disappear for my own good. He wrote it like a memory we shared. We didn't. The final line was underlined. "You owe me for what I built." I folded the letter slowly and placed it on the table. That was the moment I understood. This was no longer about control, or money, or reputation. This was about ownership. People like him don't just want to win. They want you to agree that they deserve to. I didn't reply. Not because I was unsure, but because I was done participating in his version of reality. Instead, I did something I should have done years earlier. I gathered everything. Emails, messages, drafts, voice notes. Every moment where my instincts had told me something was wrong and I had ignored it for the sake of peace. What emerged wasn't chaos. It was a pattern. He didn't take everything at once. He asked. He suggested. He framed decisions as protection. He waited for exhaustion. Then he moved. It wasn't accidental. It was methodical. I met with my lawyer again, not to fight, to prepare. I showed her the letter. She didn't look surprised. She said something that made my chest tighten. "This isn't leverage," she said. "This is panic." She explained it calmly. His business was unstable. Creditors were watching. Partnerships were thinning. He needed something solid, something familiar, something he could claim. Me. That night I dreamed of our old house, not the rooms, but the locks, every door closed from the outside. I woke up knowing what I had to do. The next morning I replied. One sentence. "Please direct all further communication through legal counsel." That was it. No emotion, no defense, no explanation. He didn't respect it. Of course he didn't, because boundaries feel like betrayal to people who benefited from your silence. He showed up instead, at my building, at night. I didn't open the door. I didn't speak. I watched from behind the curtain as he stood there, angry, small, gesturing to nothing. And for the first time, I felt something unfamiliar. Not fear, detachment. The next day, my lawyer called. His legal team had filed something. Not a lawsuit, a claim, alleging that I had withheld shared intellectual property during the divorce. It was weak, but it was loud and it was public. That's when the messages started. Colleagues asking if I was okay, clients asking if everything was resolved, old acquaintances resurfacing with curiosity disguised as concern. He wanted me distracted, reactive, ashamed. I didn't panic. I responded with documentation, proof, timelines, original files with metadata. And then we did something unexpected. We countersent, not a lawsuit, a disclosure notice outlining evidence of coercion, misrepresentation, and reputational interference. Still quiet, still professional, still devastating. 3 days later, his claim was withdrawn. No apology, no explanation, just silence. The kind that means someone has finally been told to stop. I thought that would be the end. I underestimated one thing. People who lose everything externally will try to reclaim power internally, and when that fails, they look for witnesses. A week later, I received a call from someone I hadn't spoken to in years, his mother. Her voice trembled. She said he was not himself, that he felt misunderstood, that he believed I was rewriting history. She asked me, gently, to meet, just once, for closure. I almost said no, almost, but then I realized something important. This was no longer about him. It was about the truth having nowhere left to hide. We met in a neutral place. She looked tired, older than I remembered. She talked about his childhood, his ambition, his fear of failure. I listened. Then I spoke, not defensively, not emotionally, factually. I told her what happened, not my feelings, just actions, documents, patterns. Silence filled the space between us. Then she said something I will never forget. The public part began quietly. No announcement, no accusation, no dramatic reveal. Just consequences unfolding where he no longer had control. It started with a panel invitation, an industry event, respected, recorded. They asked me to speak about rebuilding after loss, specifically professional displacement. I clarified something immediately. I wouldn't discuss my marriage. I wouldn't name anyone. I wouldn't speculate. They agreed. Because the truth doesn't need embellishment when it's structural. On stage, I talked about process, how ideas are born, how teams function when trust exists, how creative ecosystems collapse when credit is centralized. I spoke like a professional, calm, measured, unemotional. And in the audience, unbeknownst to me, sat 3 people who used to work for him. They recognized the framework, not the story, the pattern. And patterns are louder than names. The clip circulated, not because it was dramatic, but because it was precise. People shared it with captions like, "This explains so much. I've seen this happen. Leadership matters more than ownership." No one tagged him. No one needed to. 2 days later, his company announced a strategic pause on new projects. A week later, a partner withdrew. Then another. It wasn't scandal. It was erosion. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened on my side. Clients began asking questions, not about the divorce, about availability, about long-term collaboration, about building something together. They weren't drawn to my resilience. They were drawn to my restraint. One message stood out, from a firm that had once chosen him over me. "We made the wrong call. Would you consider a conversation?" I read it twice, then once more, then closed the laptop and went for a walk, because vindication feels heavier than people think. I didn't rush to respond, because timing is part of integrity. When I did reply, it was simple. Happy to talk, no history required. And that was true. The meeting was efficient. They apologized, professionally, not emotionally. They asked how they envisioned leadership. I answered honestly. Shared power, transparent credit, documented boundaries. They nodded. They signed. Around the same time, the article followed up. The journalist didn't contact me. She didn't need to. The data spoke. Leadership changes, revenue shifts, talent loss. Still no names, still unmistakable. That's when his silence broke. Not directly, through intermediaries, old friends reaching out, mutual connections checking in. Each message carried the same subtext: please stop. I didn't respond because I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't exposing him. I wasn't attacking. I was existing openly, and that was the one thing he couldn't counter. Then came the email from his new lawyer. Different tone, conciliatory. They proposed a mutual non-disparagement agreement. I read it slowly, then laughed out loud. Non-disparagement protects reputations that are being threatened. Mine wasn't. His was collapsing under its own weight. I declined, politely. That refusal triggered something final. He posted, not professionally, personally, a long emotional message about betrayal, about being used, about people who rewrite history. He didn't name me, but he didn't have to. The response wasn't what he expected. No support surge, no defense, just questions, requests for clarity, confusion, and then silence. Because when someone talks too much, people listen less. What followed wasn't backlash. It was absence. Invitations stopped, messages slowed, meetings canceled. Not dramatically, logistically. At the same time, my calendar filled, not with noise, with substance. Long-term plans, shared ownership models, respectful negotiations. One evening, while reviewing a contract, I realized something that stopped me cold. Every agreement I was signing now had my name clearly stated, my role defined, my contributions protected. Not because I demanded it, because people offered it. That's when it hit me. He hadn't just taken everything. He had. The reckoning didn't arrive as a breakdown. It arrived as a mirror. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. No warning, no buildup. I was reviewing a proposal when an email notification slid across my screen. Sender, Court Records Office. Subject, Final Disposition Notice. I opened it slowly. Not because I was afraid of what it said, but because I already felt what it meant. His company had filed for restructuring, not bankruptcy yet, but close enough to panic. Creditors listed, assets frozen, leadership under review. His name sat at the top of the document, alone. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. This was the moment people imagine when they think of revenge, the downfall, the proof, the confirmation that the universe keeps score. But what I felt wasn't satisfaction. It was pressure, because with collapse comes scrambling, and scrambling people do dangerous things. My phone rang, an unknown number. I didn't answer. It rang again, then stopped. A minute later, a text. "Please, just talk to me." I stared at the message longer than I should have, because this was the moment I had imagined so many times, not consciously, but emotionally. The moment he realized, the moment power reversed, the moment I could finally say everything I had swallowed. Instead, I stood up, walked to the window, and remembered the version of myself who had signed papers without reading them because she didn't want conflict. The version who believed love meant accommodation. The version who thought being agreeable was the same as being safe. I replied with one word: no. That should have been the end. It wasn't. 2 days later, I received notice that I'd been named in a deposition, not as a defendant, as a witness. His legal team wanted to establish historical involvement. They needed my voice, my memory, my credibility, the very things he had erased. I sat with that irony for a long time. Then I agreed. The deposition room was small, neutral, designed to drain emotion. He was already there when I arrived. He stood when he saw me, then hesitated, then sat back down. For the first time, I saw him without narrative. No authority, no audience, no leverage. Just a man watching consequences arrive faster than he could outrun them. The questions were procedural at first: dates, roles, responsibilities. I answered calmly, precisely, truthfully. Then they asked about decision-making authority, and everything shifted. I explained how ideas were developed, how credit was reassigned, how access changed over time. I didn't accuse, I described, and description, when consistent, becomes undeniable. His lawyer tried to interrupt, tried to redirect, tried to soften, but it was too late. Because I wasn't emotional, I was clear. Then came the question he had feared most. Did you ever consent to relinquishing ownership or authorship of your work? I didn't hesitate. No. Silence filled the room, the kind that lands like weight. He stared at the table, not angry, not defiant, deflated. In that moment, I understood something devastating. He didn't believe I would ever say it out loud. He had built his entire strategy on my silence. When it was over, I gathered my things. I didn't look at him, but he spoke anyway, softly. "I never thought you'd turn on me." I stopped, turned, and met his eyes. "I didn't," I said. "I just stopped protecting you." That was the last time I spoke to him. The fallout was immediate. The restructuring failed. Investors withdrew. Leadership dissolved. What remained was investigated, quietly, thoroughly. I wasn't named publicly, but my testimony became part of the record, permanent, uneditable. The media never framed it as a scandal. They framed it as caution, a lesson in overreach, in mistaking control for competence, in believing people are replaceable when they're actually foundational. Weeks later, I received a message from someone I didn't expect, a junior employee from years ago. She wrote, "Watching this unfold helped me leave a situation where I was being erased too. Thank you." I cried when I read that, not because of what happened to him, but because of what almost happened to me. Still, the highest tension wasn't external, it was internal. Because once the noise stopped, one question remained. Why did I stay silent for so long? The answer wasn't weakness, it was conditioning. I had been taught that being accommodating made me valuable, that conflict meant failure, that trust was proven by surrender. I saw now how those beliefs had been used, how slowly, how deliberately. The divorce took my assets, but the aftermath gave me something sharper: discernment. One evening I stood in my new office, small, clean, earned. I looked at my name on the door, not paired, not minimized, just mine. That's when it hit me. The climax of this story wasn't his collapse, it was my refusal to disappear. But there was still one final chapter left, because endings aren't complete until meaning is made, and I hadn't yet said the most important thing. Not to him, to myself. The ending didn't feel like victory. It felt like quiet. Not the lonely quiet from before, the kind that echoed with doubt and replayed conversations you wished you'd handled differently. This was a different kind of silence, the kind that doesn't ask questions. After everything settled, after the legal language stopped arriving, after people stopped asking for updates, after his name faded into something I no longer reacted to, I finally had space to sit with the truth. Not his truth, not the version people debated online, mine. For a long time, I believed the divorce was the moment I lost everything. The house, the savings, the structure of a life I had built carefully, patiently, with someone I trusted. But that wasn't the real loss. The real loss happened much earlier, when I learned to doubt my instincts, when I learned to soften my voice to avoid conflict, when I learned to confuse peace with silence. He didn't take my future, he took my certainty, and for years I let him keep it. I think that's what makes stories like this dangerous. People assume betrayal looks dramatic, cruel, obvious, but most of the time it looks reasonable. It looks like compromise. Looking back, the signs were there. Not shouting, not violence, not chaos, just patterns. Small dismissals, gradual erasure, decisions made for me instead of with me. And every time I ignored the discomfort, I taught him something, that I would adjust. When the divorce stripped everything away, it didn't just leave me with nothing. It left me with myself, unbuffered, unprotected, unavoidable. At first, that was terrifying. I didn't know who I was without partnership, without shared plans, without someone else steering. But slowly, painfully, I learned. I learned that rebuilding doesn't start with money. It starts with permission. Permission to trust your memory. Permission to believe your discomfort matters. Permission to walk away without explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. I learned that silence is not strength when it protects harm, and that speaking, even calmly, even late, is not betrayal. It's alignment. There's a moment people don't talk about enough. The moment after justice, whatever form it takes, arrives. The moment when the villain falls or fades or simply stops mattering. You're left alone with the aftermath. And the question becomes, who are you now that survival is no longer your full-time job? For me, the answer arrived slowly, in small, almost boring ways. Paying my own bills without fear, signing my own contracts and reading every word, saying no without cushioning it. I stopped over-explaining, stopped asking permission to take up space, stopped shrinking my accomplishments so others wouldn't feel threatened. And something surprising happened. People didn't pull away. They leaned in. I built again. Not louder, not bigger, but truer. Work that reflected my values, collaborations that felt mutual, success that didn't require me to disappear behind it. Sometimes people ask if I regret not fighting harder earlier, if I wish I had exposed him sooner, if I'd do anything differently. Here's the truth. I don't regret surviving the way I knew how, but I would never confuse survival with wisdom again. Because what he took taught me something priceless, that trust without accountability is not love, that partnership without visibility is not safety, that being nice can be weaponized against you if you're not careful. He thought he took everything, and legally, maybe he did, but what he actually took was something temporary, resources. What he gave me, unintentionally, was permanent, clarity. Clarity about my boundaries, clarity about my worth, clarity about the cost of silence. I no longer fear losing things, I fear losing myself, and that fear keeps me awake in the best way. If you're listening to this and something feels familiar, if you're in a situation where your voice is shrinking, where decisions are being made without you, where your intuition keeps knocking and being ignored, please hear this. You're not dramatic, you're not imagining it, and you're not weak for staying. But you don't have to stay forever. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't leaving. It's remembering who you were before you started disappearing. My husband